Welcome to Bandits Keep. I'm Daniel. This week we're going to talk about travel, and we've talked about travel before, but in this case we're going to talk about the idea of simulation versus abstraction. So of course, we're always touching on this kind of stuff, right? If we do just a narrative example of travel, you travel for 2 months on a boat and it's stormy and then you arrive. That's very abstract, right? Or somewhere in the middle could be a point crawl where things happen, but you're kind of cutting out the middle. Or you could do a hex crawl which a little bit more detailed. But can we get more detailed than that? Getting lost in the open. So this topic comes about because I was doing a little bit more outdoor survival, the game Outdoor Survival as it would be, with my in-person group. Now I use it all the time with my solo game. If you're unfamiliar with that, link below. And normally when I would run it with the in-person group, we use the straight up OD&D rules. But this last time, because I just wanted to mix it up and try something different, I said, let's try to actually use the Outdoor Survival rules, which are definitely more abstract. That is to say, you lose a little bit of player agency to the dice. And overall, I don't think it was as successful as the other way, like doing the straight up D&D way. So I could see why they changed it. And we came into a discussion, we talk about it. In my group, we're like that. We talk about stuff as we go. And one of the things that was mentioned, one of the players said, this is more of a abstraction versus a simulation because it was a question about the forest. And I thought this was really interesting because what is the clear, right? When we look at that as a terrain type, what is woods? What are mountains, right? Is the clear flat? Is the clear small rolling hills? Is the clear kind of a slopes? What is the clear? Is it grassy fields? Is it rough ground, right? All these things are clear, right? Are there some gullies? Are there small copses of trees mixed in the clear, or is it just flat, right? What is woods? Is it a dense wood that you can't see through? Is it spread out trees here and there? What are mountains, right? How steep are they? Are they flat cliffs? Are they just sloping going up? What are these things, right? We just have terms. Mountain. What is a mountain? And here's the thing. Somebody's going to tell me what a mountain is in the comments below. That's okay. You can do it if you want. And what we get here is we get now the idea that this is a bit of an abstraction, right? So if you move into a hex that is a wooded hex, what does that mean? And does it mean that the second you cross that hex's border, you're like, that's like a line of trees and that's it, the forest starts here? Is that how we're treating it? Or could you, in theory, wander into a wooded hex from the clear and not realize that you actually were in a wooded hex until you by game standards, were already through the hex or deep into it where you were basically in the hex? This is really interesting. And obviously, if you're just running a hex map hidden from your players, it's a little bit easier for you to just, know that or decide that or go with it via your description. But if you are putting a map on the table, which is the way I often do, this is a point of discussion and a really interesting one, I think. Mountains just don't go up. So I want to jump in here for a second and tell a little story. Don't worry, to be short. When I was maybe 12 years old, we used to have a summer cottage in New Hampshire in basically a mountainous area. And there was this it was really a hill. It was maybe like a mile to the top across a road from the lake where my family was at a beach. And I had been up to the top before via the path. And, it was the 80s. So my parents let a 12-year-old just go by themselves. And I knew that I was going south. To the east, there was another road a couple miles over. To the west, there was miles of woods. Basically behind me was the lake, and I knew the mountain was to the north, the top of the mountain. So I was on the path, and I thought, I'm adventurous. I'm going to go through the woods. I'm going to not use the path. Let's get into this. Maybe I had watched some Rambo movie or something. Who knows what I was doing? I went off into the woods. I walked east effectively for, maybe half a mile, however far I walked. And then I said, well, the mountain's up, right? So I started walking up. And then I was 12, right? So I didn't know much. I got lost. Why did I get lost? Well, mountains just don't go up, right? I'm going effectively up, and then I have to go around an area that's wet or whatever, and then all of a sudden it looks like it's going down. Is that the wrong way? Did I get turned around? Hold on. Which way am I going? Am I going this way? I think I just came from that way. Because that's the nature of it, right? A mountain is not just a continuous slope up, it's this. And I can tell you now, I live in a mountainous area, and that's exactly true. So when you think about this, about what is being lost, right? Being lost doesn't necessarily mean, because of course me as an adult would have less of a chance of being lost the way I was as a kid because I have some navigation that I've learned through time in the military service. But anyways, the idea of it, though, is that I could still get pushed in a roundabout way. So when I think about hex crawling and I think about being lost, I wonder if the term lost is not exactly the one we want to use. Off course. So let's imagine, for instance, you are in the clear on the Outdoor Survival map board, like we run, and the hex you want to get to is right next to you. It's one move away. And you roll the dice in the morning and you get lost. Now, lost in OD&D means you move one hex in a random direction, and sometimes it turns out you go in the direction you want to go in, and then you can re-navigate from there. Does this make sense? In a 5-mile hex that's clear, right? Whatever clear means to you, wouldn't you see the town that's no more than 10 miles away? I don't know. I mean, you can't really see, even on a flat plane, more than about 3 miles or so. If I'm in, again, tell me in the comments, because of the curvature of the Earth. Don't tell me the Earth's flat. We're not playing Hyperborea. And so I don't know that you can see 10 miles straight, first of all, if you're flat. So, but hold on, but maybe it's weird for you to get lost. You're at least heading in the right direction. I mean, you're not necessarily on either ends of the axis. How can we play into this? What does it even mean to be lost? Well, this happened in my explanation to the one player who hadn't played this way before was that, well, lost doesn't necessarily mean that you're lost. It means that you're sidetracked, right? You need to go east when you want to go south because something is in your way. You cannot progress. And we're in the movement scale, so we're abstracting it. So going back to what I said at the beginning, you lose a little bit of player agency because you're not playing that part out. The assumption is something happened that sidetracked you. You lose time as a resource. You don't get to play it out. But I wonder, would it be worthwhile to play it out? And how would you handle that? Would you say, or could you say to the player, okay, since you rolled off course, what you've come to is a wide river that you cannot cross. You're going to have to move to the next text over to get around it. This is how we're explaining it. But the player says, hold on, I have a folding boat. Now you could say, well, all right, then you will be able to navigate across the river without losing any time at all, or however you want to do it. Is this a factor that we want to bring into our hex crawling? And would this spice it up? I mean, I think the answer to the second part is, yeah, I think that's really interesting. And maybe it is, but I wonder, I think it comes down to, I said this before about the kind of murder hobo stuff. Is it the game you want to play? Do we want to negotiate obstacles in a more simulationist manner when we're hex crawling, or do we want to handle that more abstractly? And once you can make that determination, you can start to figure out how you want to do things. You can get really precise. You can have light woods, medium woods, heavy woods. You can have mountains that are very steep. You could have, valleys and stuff within them. You could make it so that every time you enter a 5-mile mountain hex, you have a smaller sub-hex that's broken down into 1-mile stretches, and those are broken up into navigational points. You could get as simulationist as you want, and I think that could be a really fun game if you're playing something where it's a Borderlands campaign and the characters are, in fact, discovering for the first time and maybe gaining experience points for that discovering. If the hex crawl is really a way to add a little bit of drama into a game where it's really a minor part, I think then the less simulation works. Now, you could go all the ways over, and there was discussion in this particular game about, well, we've actually been to this place before. And this was actually on me. I probably should have realized that. I got excited about running the game, and I thought they were going to go somewhere else, and they changed their mind last second. And they had indeed been there before from where they left. So honestly, it should not have been hard to navigate there, and we didn't need to even do it. We could have just done it theater of the mind, which is what I would have done. And, that's it, right? We all learn by playing, right? Why make somebody go through a maze if they don't need to, if they have a road? And I think that's another thing we want to think about. Combining any of these things, your simulationist when you really want this lost in the woods, we're exploring feel, the kind of abstract when you're exploring an area that's, unknown, but you don't want to dig into it too deeply. And then you're more abstract, you're really abstract even point crawler or even theater of the mind, if it doesn't really matter. It's a place that they've been before. Maybe make a roll, one roll or two rolls, whatever, how long it takes, just to see if they encounter something that might be a hazard. And even that might just be a quick narration. We can incorporate all of these into our games. And I think ultimately that's what makes a campaign very rich, is that when we use different things. I think that if you always do the same thing, and then it becomes this standard operating procedure, then, and I'm going to go completely off course here and talk about dungeon crawls. 10-foot pole. Sometimes it's easier to explain things like this in dungeon crawl ways, because I feel like navigating in hex crawls is something that people are less familiar with. Not exactly sure why. Probably because dungeon crawls are just something that most dungeon masters make as their first adventure, so we're a little more familiar with them. But anyways, if you think about this, like I've had people say this, I want simulation. I want the person to listen at the door. I want them to do this. I want them to do that. And then what you end up with is a group that finally just goes, we don't want to say this every single time, because if we skip one of these and then the dungeon master drops a trap on us, it feels unfair. So we're going to make a list. And now we're just reading from this list, or we hand it to the dungeon master and say, this is what we do each time. At that point, you're just abstracting it again, right? So I think that if you want to have a dungeon crawl where things are more precise, I think you need to wrap things together. So for instance, when the party is moving through a dungeon and they're moving along at the normal exploration pace, which is admittedly slow, as most people say, that assumes they're being stealthy, they're listening, they're stopping every bit to kind of look around, they're mapping, they've got their eyes open. And because of this, you have just a very basic chance of being surprised, and the enemy also has the basic chance of being surprised. And that is assuming stealth, right? There's a stealth assumed in that. If the party also says, and I'm going to be probing ahead with my 10-foot pole, do you need to make them roll every single square a search check? Of course not. What you want to do there is think to yourself, when will this become relevant? If there's a trap there, and using BX, for instance, or OSE, there's you roll D6, and on a 1 or a 2, the trap goes off. Well, treat the 10-foot pole as the first character, right? You don't have to do anything else except for that. You just roll for that pole when it hits the trap. And if it sets it off, then they find the trap. If it doesn't, then perhaps one of the other characters finds it in a very unpleasant manner. This also works with the wilderness. It's not important until it is. So all in all, I think we need to measure our simulation versus our abstraction versus our narration and weigh them out in a balance. Decide what is important. When is it important for us to simulate things? And when is it important for us to just treat it as an abstract and go with the flow? And when is it important to just kind of hand wave it? All of this is fine. And what we want to do is generally mix it up. And I think here's one final thing, is that if you 99.9% of the time treat everything as a simulation, and then you go ahead and abstract something later, that will confuse the players and put them on edge. And maybe you want to do that to put them on edge. But typically, you don't really want to. Like KR King from D&D Homebrew always says to me that in his group, he uses miniatures when they would do battles. But sometimes, every once in a while, it'd be a small battle or whatever reason, he just wouldn't break out the miniatures. And the whole group would be like looking at each other like, what's going on here? So that's the thing, right? We set standards. We set a pace. We are simulating or abstracting or narrating our world. So if you plan on using all of these tools, mix them up. So do some narration, do some abstract, do some simulation. Make sure that when you're doing each one, it's clear to the players. When you're simulating, and you're going to be very precise about it. You're going to say, all right, you look across this open plane, stretches out further than you can see, but you notice that there are some dips and valleys. Over here, there's a few copses of trees. You can see some long grass where birds are flying up. Perhaps there's some movement. Okay, or you go, all right, you've entered a clear hex. I roll no wandering monster. Okay, next day, where do you guys want to go? That's abstract, right? Or you say, you've got 15 miles of clear terrain to travel. You're on a caravan trail. It's going to take 2 days. Player 1, go ahead and just make a roll to see if you encounter anything on this trip. Now you're narrating. Mix it up. Let the players see when you're doing it and make it obvious. And I think you'll get a really good mix. So there we go. I would love to know how you handle travel like this. Do you ever get deep down in the simulation? Do you use maps on the table, like I was saying, or do you keep it all behind your screen? Is it all theater of the mind? Do you, as I've heard some people read some people place in the comments before, do you not use hexes at all? And you just use a scale, like an inch scale, and you just have an open map? How do you do it? I would love to know. You can leave a comment below. Also, check out the description. In the description, you're going to find a link to my Discord server. Lots of great conversations going on over there. You'll find a link to my t-shirts if you're interested in that. You will find a link to my Patreon, all kinds of stuff in the description. It's the hidden jewel of the channel. Anyways, I'll talk to you soon.